Hey friends, happy Tuesday and welcome to our study of the Gospel of Luke through this season of Lent. We're now in Holy Week. This is our last week of reading Luke together, and so we'll finish up here on Saturday and then of course have Easter celebration on Sunday. So glad you're with us this morning. So good to see everyone's names. And as we get started, obviously we've moved yesterday into the arrest of Jesus. We've moved from sort of the events of the last week into the events of the last hours, and these will be familiar stories to you. We're going to pay a lot of attention to the ways in which Luke distinguishes himself from the other Gospels, details he gives, details he leaves out, details he changes, because again, those don't mean that the Gospels are not trustworthy. Far from it. And in fact, sometimes those details really reveal to us the emphases, the focus that each of the gospel writers brings to their portrait of Jesus. And so sometimes those distinctive details are some of the richest parts of the story. And I think it's such a gift that the church has given us four gospels rather than just deciding on one and saying this is the authoritative one. There was a willingness in the early church to hold to that ambiguity, and because they believed these four Gospels were trustworthy from trustworthy sources, and they felt they were it was worth it for us to have all four of them to give light on who Christ is. And I think that's not only a tremendous gift in that we have those four Gospels, but it's also a tremendous lesson for us in our own faith about the power of holding to tension in multiple perspectives. And in some ways, those don't always contradict one another. We don't have to think in a binary fashion. Sometimes they complement one another in a really powerful way. I think that's especially true in the last 24 hours of Jesus' life. So let's jump into that, but let's begin with our prayer of confession this morning. Let's pray together. Most merciful God, we confess that we have sinned against you in thought, word, and deed, by what we have done and by what we have left undone. We have not loved you with our whole heart. We have not loved our neighbors as ourselves. We are truly sorry, and we humbly repent. For the sake of your Son, Jesus Christ, have mercy on us and forgive us, that we may delight in your will and walk in your ways to the glory of your name. Amen. All right, so again, we are in chapter 22 of the Gospel of Luke. We're beginning with verse 54. This picks up right after Jesus has been arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane. Remember, you have a number of soldiers that have been led there by Judas. Judas identifies Jesus with a kiss. Some of the disciples in Luke try and strike and cut off a slave's ear. Jesus heals it and tells them to stop, that they're being ridiculous. The other piece that we read yesterday that will be important for today is Peter's claim that he will not fail Jesus. That all the rest may fall away, but even to prison, even to death, Peter will be faithful. That's a really important piece. The other beautiful passage that Luke alone includes of Jesus' words to Peter, of how Jesus has prayed for Peter specifically. Remember, he calls him Simon for the first time since chapter 6, names him by his formal name, and tells him that he has been praying for Peter specifically, that after he fails, he will come back, because in that coming back, he will be the one to give strength to his brothers. And so there's such beautiful pastoral sort of discipling friendship moments, almost mentoring moments between Jesus and Peter, and obviously Peter told these stories. These were important stories for Peter because they. And Peter was obviously willing to talk about his failures as well, and that's the reason we have some of these stories that we're about to read now. So that sets the scene. It sets the stage for what's going to happen here now that Jesus has been arrested and brought back to the high priest's house. So let's jump in at Luke 22, verse 54. Then they seized him and led him away from the garden, bringing him into the high priest's house. But Peter was following at a distance. This is a significant distance in the Greek, but it just lets you know that sure enough, of all the disciples who the rest of them supposedly ran, in John's account, he says that John was with him. John always puts himself in those places. You can take that for what it's worth. The point is that Peter after saying he would go with Jesus, does go with Jesus. It may have been Peter who cut off the slave's ear and took up the sword to defend Jesus. So before we toss Peter aside as a denier, as a deserter, I want you to notice how hard Peter tries to keep his word. Peter tries very, very hard to be faithful to Jesus. So don't write him off. He's not, he in so many ways is much braver than I would have been, much more courageous. He wants to do the right thing. And so even though a small army has come to take Jesus away, Peter's still following them at a distance, looking for something he can do, not knowing what he can do. I just want you to imagine that desperation, that feeling that from a distance watching your friend, your rabbi, your teacher, the one you believe to be the anointed one, the one sent by God, the Messiah who will redeem Israel, being led away by this army, and you are powerless. And again, as much as Jesus has prepared the disciples, as much as we know what's going to come, I want you to just try and put yourself in that place emotionally and spiritually where the disciples, they have not put those pieces together. And so this does not feel like the unfolding of what Jesus promised. This feels like the exact opposite of what they thought would happen. Remember, just hours ago, they were arguing over who was the greatest and who was going to have the corner office in the kingdom. And now it looks like all of that is coming undone. It looks like all the promise of Jesus, all the miracles, all the healing, all the teaching, it's going to be undone by these enemies of Christ who were leading him away. And Peter is one man following an army, wanting to do something and having no options, really. It's an incredibly dark and desperate moment. So they arrive at the high priest's house. And when they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat among them. And this gives you a sense that in the literal Greek that Jesus is pretty close to the fire, and that explains why people can see him, if that helps you. The other Gospels tell us it was cold. John tells us that it was a charcoal fire that was burning. Again, every one of the Gospels gives slightly different details. The distinctive way in which Luke is going to tell this story is whereas the other Gospels tell Peter's denial sort of back and forth in the trial of Jesus, that really, in fact, the other Gospels really make Peter look bad, because as you're switching scenes in the other Gospels, watching Jesus face down this mockery of justice, you have Peter outside simultaneously denying knowing Jesus. Luke is not going to do it in that way. He's going to sort of separate those elements so we have them isolated, which really has the effect, I think, of making Peter not look as bad. I don't know if that's Luke's intention or not, but Luke's going to include some details that the other Gospels don't have that are some of the most poignant and powerful in this moment to me. So Peter's sitting among them around the fire, and a servant girl. All four of the Gospels agree that the first one to question Peter is a slave girl. And again, I think this is important because it happened that way. Whenever the four Gospels agree on something, it's pretty clear that when Peter told this story, he remembered that it was a servant girl. And so when he told this story, it was always a servant girl first. And remember, in that day and age, especially, children had no power. There was no sort of concept of adolescence. Slaves certainly had no power. Women had little to no power. And so this servant girl is, for that first century world, sociologically, she is no one. She is powerless. This is not somebody to be afraid of. And so it's ironic that the same Peter who has said, I will go with you to prison and even to death, his courage is going to come apart in front of a little girl who also happens to be someone's servant. So a servant girl, verse 56, seeing him in the firelight, stared at him and said, this man also was with him. But he denied it, saying, woman, I do not know him. If you go to Jerusalem today, some of y'all have been I see from your names that some of y'all have been to this place with me. This is one of my favorite places when we go to the Holy Land. It's the Church of St. Peter Gallicantu, the Church of St. Peter and the Rooster, if you will. And it sits up on a hill, presumably upon the same place where the high priest's house was, across the valley from the Mount of Olives. And so this is the church built on the site where Peter's denial happened, where Jesus was being questioned by being questioned by the high priest and the Sanhedrin. And it again, it's one of the most powerful places in the Holy Land to go to. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just as we go. So Peter has said, "I don't know the man. Woman, I do not know this man." Verse 58, again, Luke is going to compress all of these together rather than swapping scenes. A little later, and in these Passion accounts in this last 24 hours, we're going to get so much more detail about timing. But a little later, someone else, on seeing him, said, "You also are one of them." But Peter said, "Man, I am not." Even more emphatically here, denying it. And then about an hour later, so he's had time to sort of build up his courage or run away, but he's still there. Still another kept insisting, "Surely this man also was with him, for he is a Galilean." We don't know if it's Peter's appearance that gives off the fact that he is from the sticks, or his accent. Remember, Galilee is redneck Israel. It is in first century. Remember in the Gospel of John, when one of the disciples hears that Jesus is from Nazareth, and the response is, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" I mean, Nazareth is nowhere. Galilee is nowhere. Certainly not as sophisticated as Jerusalem is, and so. There's something about Peter that gives away that he is from Galilee, whether it's his speech, whether it's his clothing, whatever it is. Surely this man was with him because he is a Galilean. But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you are talking about." And at that moment, while he was still speaking, the cock crowed. Now, here's what I love about Luke. So in the other Gospels, it's the sound of the cock crowing that sort of gives away, that sort of wakes Peter up to what he's done. And again, in the other Gospels, the cock crows 3 times, sort of once for every denial. This was also a marking of time. So we talked yesterday about how the fourth watch of Roman soldiers would begin in that window. I think it's 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. It's that window where the rooster starts to wake up and starts to crow, and sometimes that was called, I'm going to get it wrong, but it had, that hour was called the fourth watch, but it was also sometimes, proi is the Greek, and I can't remember what the phrase was that relates to roosters, but that's not going to be on the test. So the point is that we're in that 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. window when roosters start to wake up, and in other Gospels it's the sound of that third rooster crow. I don't know why I didn't get on the first or the second in the other Gospels, but it's the sound of the rooster crow that sort of wakes Peter up. That's not the case here in Luke, and this is the verse I'm going to preach on for Good Friday, because it just gets me. And only Luke has this moment. Only Luke has this moment, and it's so incredibly powerful to me. Verse 61. The Lord turned and looked at Peter. So this gives you the sense that when Jesus is at his trial, when he's being questioned, a lot of these homes are open, much more open than ours are now. And so out in the courtyard, Peter has a direct line of sight to Jesus. Jesus has a direct line of sight to Peter. And in this very moment, when the cock crows, the Lord turns and looks at Peter, and Peter sees that, and it's that moment that wakes Peter up, this moment of connection. And again, all those words that Jesus had said, "Peter, I am praying for you as you come into the time of trial. When you come back, you must be strong for your brothers. You are being sifted like wheat. You're going to deny me." Like all this stuff comes and lands on Peter. When you're at the Church of St. Peter Gallicantu, there's just some beautiful art. Here you have This is Peter down in the bottom of the picture, and he's waving his hands away. Here you've got the servant girl who's questioning him, and others around the fire, and directly above that statue at the top of this post that the centurion is sort of behind is a rooster, Gallicantu, remembering the cry of the roosters that sort of snaps Peter out of it. And as soon as this happens, as the Lord looks at Peter, Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said to him, before the cock crows today, you will deny me 3 times. And he went out and wept bitterly. This phrase, wept bitterly, is also in Isaiah. It has the sense of failure, of shame, of horror at what's been done. And again, I want us to see the power of Peter's story is that not only is he the rock of the church, that he's such a powerful leader from Pentecost on in the early church there in Jerusalem, that he has such a change of heart in Acts about Cornelius and the Gentiles. Peter is a really fascinating figure in the Gospels, and a really powerful sort of character study for us as to what it means to be a person of faith, because Peter has every high and every low of someone trying to follow Jesus. He does not get it all right. And we know these stories about Peter's failures. There's not a big crowd around that's a part of the church to tell these stories. We know these stories because Peter told these stories. We know these stories because Peter thought these stories of failure, these stories of falling short, these stories of being sort of helpless before the mercy of Christ, and his own willfulness failing him, his own desire to be faithful to Jesus having fallen short. Peter believes these moments are integral and non-negotiable in the story of his faith. And so when he would preach, when he would share his eyewitness accounts of Jesus, he told the moments of failure. And I just want us to hold on to that, because some of us are very good at that. Some of us are very good about being authentic and transparent. Others of us in an Instagram, sort of Facebook, Snapchat world, feel like we need to sort of polish that veneer so much, especially in church. We need to present ourselves in such a way that we almost make the Christian faith sort of a Christian fake, that you've got to appear in a certain way, right? You've got to polish yourself up for the neighborhood association. You've got to your kids have to be normal. Your marriage has to be healthy. You shouldn't be drinking too much or doing other things in the dark of night that ne'er-do-wells do. The power of Peter's story is the power of redemption. That Peter's will fails him. Peter's decisiveness fails him. Peter's intentions fail him. And yet Peter is not beyond redemption. Peter is not beyond redemption. That's going to be the story of Acts. Is the first half is going to be about Peter's strengthening and the way he strengthens his brothers. It's going to be Peter speaking up for Paul's mission. And really it's Peter's authority that opens the door for Paul and Barnabas and the rest to do their mission to the Gentiles, which makes us followers of Christ. So I want us to sort of not let that moment go. That the Lord turns and looks at Peter, and Peter weeps bitterly, but Peter's story is not over. And if, for those of you that have had moments of brokenness, moments of failure, maybe you're in a moment of failure right now, maybe this year has been a moment of failure for you, that is not cause to distance yourself from God. It's not cause to distance yourself from the people of God. And in fact, I think what we most need in the church often are reminders that we are not good people. We just aren't. We are broken people. And when we pretend to be otherwise, when we pretend to be sort of the country club of the saved, rather than the hospital of the broken, the hospital of the Peters weeping bitterly, we really miss the power of the gospel. And in that way, we become much more like the Pharisees than we do like the early disciples. Peter was not afraid to tell his story. I'll leave it at that. I've beat that into the ground. The most powerful part of this church, built on top of the remains of Caiaphas's house, is that down in the basement of Caiaphas' house is sort of a dungeon, a storage room. It could have been used for livestock, but also it would have been a place to put prisoners, right? So you can just imagine that in the deliberations over Jesus' fate, this is where they would have put this is where they would have put Jesus. And so they allow you, when you go visit the Church of St. Peter Gallicantu, to climb down into this dungeon and imagine Jesus being there in solitude, being able to hear the voices of his captors debating over his fate. It's just a really, really moving moment. I've done it 3 times now, and it still gets me every time, even though I know it's coming. To imagine the solitude and the loneliness of Jesus in that moment. If we can imagine Peter's isolation, his weeping bitterly, when Jesus turns and looks at Peter, and Peter runs, Jesus also knows fully he is completely alone. He has surrounded himself with the disciples, and they weren't great companions all the time, but this is the moment in which Jesus is fully alone. There's so many beautiful psalms in those passages we talked about yesterday from Isaiah about the suffering servant. These notions of being left alone, and on the cross in Matthew and Mark. Jesus will quote from Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? These powerful images and passages of being sort of just broken, not just in body, but broken in spirit, broken by isolation and broken feeling alone and distant from God. That's the place that Jesus is in here in his trial. And so here's Luke's account of that trial, beginning with verse 63 of chapter 22. Now the men who were holding Jesus began to mock him and beat him. They also blindfolded him and kept asking him, "Prophesy, who is it that struck you?" They kept heaping many other insults on him. When day came, again, and this is where we get the idea that he's in this pit for hours, waiting for the sun to come up. They can't take him before the Roman authorities until the sun comes up. The assembly of the elders of the people, both chief priests and scribes, gathered together, and they brought him to their council. They said, "If you are the Messiah, tell us." What they're looking for here is not, "Hey, we'd like to know if you're the Messiah or not." They don't think he's the Messiah. What they need Jesus to do is to claim to be the Messiah, because then they can charge Jesus with blasphemy. There's some scholarly disagreement as to whether or not the high priests and the high council had the authority to execute the death penalty in ancient Rome. They certainly did when they weren't under Roman occupation, but we believe that the Romans didn't allow the Jews to carry out the death penalty, and that explains why they need the Roman Empire, and they need Jesus to have committed a political crime in order to justify the Romans getting involved. But some scholars argue that for blasphemy, the Sanhedrin had the authority to stone to death someone. We're not exactly sure about that. Let's not get in the weeds about that. But I think that's a fascinating case study, because it helps you understand the hurry of the Sanhedrin, the hurry of this religious council that is breaking its own rules. They aren't typically allowed to meet on the eve of a Sabbath. They aren't allowed to give the death penalty until there's been 2 days' time, so that they don't do those things in a rush. And so they are violating their own standards, which for the ancient world are remarkable because they're based in Scripture. They have very high standards of justice and the ways sort of legal jurisprudence is to be carried out. And they ignore all of that in Jesus' trial. So this is not a repudiation of Jewish law or Jewish justice at all. This is what we have here is a handful of people mocking Jewish law, mocking Jewish sort of legal requirements, which again we're there to protect those being tried, as well as the principles of God's justice, and all that sort of been undone. And so what they're trying to do is get Jesus to claim to be the Messiah, because that will help them in their case against him. So, all right. So, but Jesus replies, "If I tell you, you will not believe, and if I question you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God." So again, Jesus answers without answering. This is one of his spiritual gifts. Then all of them asked, "Are you then the Son of God?" And he said to them, "You say that I am." Then they said, "What further testimony do we need? We have heard it ourselves from his own lips." And so again, this is the moment in which they take Jesus' non-answer as a confession of Jesus being the Messiah, even though here in Luke it's not at all. And this is enough for them to want to move forward. But again, according to the Gospels, the Sanhedrin is not going to carry this out. Remember, in the Apostles' Creed, we say crucified under Pontius Pilate. They need Pilate to sign off on the death penalty so that they can see Jesus eradicated. And so now they're going to have to do some gymnastics to make Jesus into an enemy of the state, not just an enemy of the Pharisees and the scribes and the Sanhedrin and the Sadducees. So that's what we're going to see in these next verses as we get into chapter 23. So that's our stopping point for today. So glad you've been with us. Since we've got a couple of minutes, let me just remind you, because y'all can help spread the word. This is a confusing Holy Week schedule. So on Maundy Thursday at Trinity, we'll have an online-only service. If you'd like to come up to the church and get communion elements, our little cups that have already been blessed, those are available in the fellowship hall. It's open during office hours. Come by and swing by if you'd like to have those for that Maundy Thursday service. They've done a really great job with music and the word and everything else in that service Thursday night, online only. Good Friday is full for the in-person service, but the pre-produced service is amazing. The sermon's not great, but the rest of it is amazing. The music is absolutely gorgeous and powerful. That's going to be a treasure for us, this pre-produced Good Friday service. So if you didn't get in-person reservations, if the waiting list doesn't open up, you are still going to be in for such a powerful worship experience. I'm so proud of the team for putting all that together. Then Saturday, we'll have an in-person. We're trying to limit it to 65 and over, but we'll make exceptions for that if you're just in a vulnerable population or you need that service for some reason. There's still spots available for that. At 5 p.m. in the sanctuary, traditional with the choir, people in robes. It's going to be beautiful. Easter service Saturday at 5, and then Sunday morning, 11 a.m., Waldrop Stadium here in Homewood at the football stadium. No reservations required. If you come early, you can bring lawn chairs and sit on the field if you'd rather be there, or if it's easier for you to get out into the field than it is to be up in the stands. That will also be live streamed, so if you're not comfortable getting out in a crowd, even though we will be outside, the weather's going to be beautiful, we'll be social distancing. If you are at a distance or just can't be there, we'll be live streaming that entire thing if that works, 11 a.m. So hope that helps. Y'all are awesome. Have a great Tuesday. So grateful for y'all and grateful for the chance to study the Word together. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon us all and grant us peace. Amen. And